Hello and welcome to the West Ham Breakdown with me, Jack Elderton, and my mate Callum Goodall. This is a bit weird. We don't usually do these. We usually stick to the whole weekend schedule and, we watch a match and then we talk about it and then we go on Patreon and we talk about the next match that's coming up. But it's all gone mad, Cal. Lopetegui's gone.
Hell
so we're doing an emergency pod. Right decision?
Right decision. Terrible execution, I would say, before we get stuck in, because I think we're probably both pretty pleased with what we're going to discuss and very excited about what could come. But I think the way it's been handled is just bad, isn't it? But now that I've been the nice guy, I can say I am so excited that he's gone, and I'm really pleased that Graham Potter's coming in.
I'm glad you've done it. I could just say the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We're back. Hello.
Hell yeah.
I might be under the weather yet again, but I'm feeling quite good today. It's a good day to be a West Ham fan.
Yeah.
Graham Potter. By the time this is out, will be announced. I think it's very obvious that's who it's going to be, which is why we're recording this this evening. Thoughts on him, just overall? How do you feel about him being the guy to take over? In some ways, it feels a bit mad that, given that we're here just a few months down the line, he wasn't the one that came in the first place in the summer. But definitely, to my mind, a move in the right direction from where we've been, or a step in the right direction from where we've been.
Yeah, 100%. I think it makes a lot of sense for both parties, I would say. I think this represents probably the perfect opportunity post-Chelsea for Potter. I think he'll have a chip on his shoulder and something to prove in the Premier League. I think actually what he did at Chelsea wasn't potentially as bad as a lot of people thought. I think it was probably a product of the environment that he was trying to work in. Lots of players that have since left have essentially said that and said it was hell to train in, impossible to work in, impossible to get results. So yeah, I think that's probably tainted his rep a little bit, and he'll be keen to put that right. And I think for West Ham, I think it's a very smart acquisition, could look very good in a couple of seasons' time. A manager that we probably felt that we'd missed the boat on. Once he'd started to really achieve things at Brighton, it looked like he was destined for one of those top clubs and probably then the England job. And by some pleasing turn of fate for us, it didn't quite work out that way, and we've managed to swoop in and grab him while we could. So yeah, really excited. Obviously we'll break into the sort of tactical implications and all that sort of thing after, but yeah, in a nutshell, very pleased, not least because I think it will mean that the podcast is probably a lot more interesting as well, because we'll be discussing different things every week rather than just the same old thing, because if there's one thing Potter is, it's versatile.
Yeah, Lopetegui was pretty versatile as well. I think we did get to the point where we were discussing several different things every week, but we were unsure what any of them were, which was a different problem entirely from where we were with David Moyes. Look, I'm going to throw one of the classic early, straight out of the gate criticisms of Graham Potter straight at you to see what you've got to say. Lovely recruitment department at Brighton. Is he all that? On my side, just to jump in, I think working with a recruitment department, given the last two managers that we have had, a track record of actually enjoying working with a recruitment department and working with the squad that's given to you, is a real positive for the direction that West Ham need to move in, rather than an actual negative, which is often presented as.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I think it should, in theory, allow West Ham as a club to head in the right direction as well. I think one of the reasons that Brighton worked so well was, yes, on the one hand, they were blessed with a very good data analysis department, very good scouts, and very smart business. But I think what often got sort of looked over almost is that, yes, that's all well and good, but that is all pointless and worthless unless you have a manager that can then extract the best out of the players that he's given. And a lot of the way that Brighton operate is, in part, yes, they go, okay, what profile do we need for this tactic to work as best it can? But also, I think a lot of what they do is go, oh, here's a market opportunity for a player that we think could be worth £100 million in a few years. Manager, here you go. We've bought him because he was cheap. Now it's up to you to go and increase his value to the point that we think you could. And that is not an easy job. And Potter's done it to a number of players. We've obviously seen Moises Caicedo move on. We've seen Cucurella move on. Ben White. The list, as everyone knows, is sort of ad nauseum almost at this point. But that's because he constantly tinkered his system to go, okay, you've bought this player and you want me to increase his value, fine, I'll make a role for him. And I think that's one of the things I'm most excited about, is that, yes, it means that he should be able to work with the players that we can go out and get, and not just go, oh, well, Moyes needs this or Lopetegui needs that. It's actually, here's a really good player that we can get. Can you get the best out of him? Yes, he's got a track record of doing that. But also profiling players. I think one of my massive frustrations, not even just under Lopetegui, but to a slightly lesser extent under Moyes, is the amount of players that we've brought in who, in theory, should be really good, but we've seemingly misprofiled. Scamacca, obviously, there was other things, but I think we used him in the wrong way, and he's since gone on and shown that he actually is a very good player in the right system. Again, Agerd, probably not cut out for the Premier League, but again, I think was asked to defend the box a little bit more than he would have liked to, because we didn't really want to commit to play in a high line. And I think one of the massive benefits of Potter is he'll go in, look at a player and go, okay, what are you really good at? All right, cool, I see that. I'm now going to go and tailor-make a role for you that is going to highlight all of your strengths and hide all of your weaknesses. And I mean, Alvarez potentially could be someone who is not going to be put in a situation quite so often where it really accentuates all of his flaws and doesn't actually highlight any of his strengths. So I think that, amongst many other things which we'll surely discuss, is something I'm really excited about, and hopefully means that we can be a slightly more sustainable profit-making club as well, because we can start to sniff around in these areas, depending on who is obviously in that recruitment department. There are rumours that he's asked to bring Carl McCauley with him, who is a very, very good scout and was kind of instrumental to a lot of the profiling done at Brighton. So if we can get that in place, that'd be great. What it means for Tim Stuyton, I don't know. However, I would say that I think Potter is probably much more ready-made to work with someone like Stuyton than Lopetegui or Moyes ever was anyway.
I think whatever you think of the director of football model, positive, negative, neutral, unsure, I think it's quite apparent that West Ham as a football club have wanted to move in that direction over the last few years, with Tim Stuyton coming in, with more infrastructure being built out behind the scenes, more people coming in different roles to kind of support on the recruitment side of things, and to be able to better exploit market opportunities as a football club as a whole, which has been a big thing that the club has needed to do, really, I think. I always sort of try and explain that we're often in quite a difficult position, because we're not quite like Brighton in the fact that we can go and recruit players who are maybe a little bit earlier in their careers and work with them and develop them, and finishing 12th or 10th whilst they have a season of development is totally acceptable. We're not quite in that spot, so being able to be successful in the transfer market is particularly difficult, I think, for clubs like West Ham and Everton, because you're always sort of chasing targets that maybe fall off the bottom of the list for a top six club, and hoping those players are good enough for you to propel you into that level, which means the top six clubs really have had to have got it wrong collectively to have left those players to you. So I think it's actually really difficult to do that successfully with a buy for now model rather than a development model, which again, there's a conflict between actually committing fully to a development focused model, because the standards at the football club don't necessarily allow you to do that, to have these kind of like long-term builds and stuff. So I think it's always been important for West Ham to develop its ability to take advantage of opportunities in the transfer window, because when they come up, that really at the kind of level that West Ham need, they're quite few and far between. And you have to be able to be adaptable as a group tactically on the pitch, and have a manager that can do that can actually develop those players that you need to buy. So I think, yeah, like I say, whatever you think of the director of football model, whether you think that a manager should have more control over the players that they have at their disposal, or less control over the players that they have at their disposal, less control is what's happening at West Ham. And therefore, having a manager that is comfortable in that kind of environment is a good thing for West Ham, as it is right now in the direction that it is moving in. So I think that's a really good thing. I think we can't really overstate enough how well Potter has done in terms of his flexibility over his entire managerial career to this point, really, in working with what he has to get the best out of what he has. The last two managers we've had have probably been slightly more what I would describe as top down. And I know Darcy's done this the other way around as a way of explaining this, but kind of a more of an imposition of a system and an approach and a style and a formation even on the group. And then if there's an awkward fit, well, they might just have to deal with that and do the best that they can in the role. Particularly Lopetegui, more so than Moyes. I think Moyes was very, very good at kind of blending the two elements and did so in a way that actually allowed for market opportunity in an entirely different way, because a lot of the players that you need to successfully execute a Moyes-like style are not really sought by many of the clubs that you're competing with, which gives you a different kind of opportunity to find players for cheaper, develop them, make them look better than they've looked at previous clubs, and get a successful system going. There are plenty of examples we've spoken about on this podcast several times: Craig Dawson, Jesse Lingard, Vladimir Sofal, Thomas Souček, etc., etc. Even Mikel Antonio, who was already in the building, is a really good example of that kind of thing that David Moyes successfully did. So I think being able to do that once more, but to do that in a way that is adapted to the tactical environment of the Premier League, is a fantastic complement of the two things that West Ham actually needs to do, and brings together the kind of the fan level demand for performance and result at the same time, and the club requirement for actually a longer term, more financially sustainable way of building and competing in the top 8, as I say, more sustainably. So I think these things can possibly come together under this manager. I also think that actually puts this manager under a lot of pressure, because he's probably the first guy that is, quote unquote, the right fit for that kind of role. Whereas previously we've had people sort of trying to adapt to be the right fit in that kind of role. I think Potter actually naturally is kind of more fitting for what we've been looking for. And in a way, I do think that kind of puts him under quite a lot of pressure, because frankly for him, he needs this job to go well after what happened at Chelsea. And with this job, I'm not sure there's really any excuse if it doesn't for him in a way that there might have been with David Moyes, with an expectation of a different style, and there might have been with the Julien Lopetegui over maybe the sort of DOF model, and not necessarily getting all the players that he needed to carry out the kind of style that he wanted to bring to West Ham. What that is, again, pretty much question marks over what we actually saw in terms of output on the pitch every single week. One other thing that I want to talk about with Graham Potter, and we kind of have to go back, well, we don't have to, but a good way of looking at this is to go all the way back to the start of his managerial career in Sweden with Östersund, is how much of a focus he has on team bonding and team building and the development of relationships, personal relationships that exist within the squad, within the staff, and between the squad and the staff. Was a huge part of what he did in Sweden. It was a huge part of why they were so successful, along with how good he was as a manager tactically and getting his team playing the kind of football that allowed them to be successful. It's also been talked about and probably blown out of proportion a little bit, because it's different. I mean, these things, when managers do things that are really notably different, then we do really sort of jump on them and really talk about them. So things like his squad doing, I think they staged their own version of Swan Lake, and they were involved in sort of community level initiatives. They also did sort of theatre productions and stuff like that. So it got his players involved in kind of lots of different things that kind of built them as people as well as footballers. Now, whether that's possible with a group of Premier League players, I don't know. I highly doubt. But I think it's clear that team building is a very important part of what Potter does. And with maybe our recent experience at West Ham, especially coming from a manager like David Moyes, where strangely, I would say, and I really mean strangely, a lot was made of how poor the team building was at the end of Moyes' period at West Ham, as if, players were being bullied and players were not being treated fairly. I actually think if you look across Moyes' tenure at West Ham, it's probably the strongest element
100%.
Of anything that he did, really, particularly when he first walked through the door. It was just the most impactful thing he did straight away was get people working together in a way that made people feel happier about coming into the building every day. I think he had a big impact, not just on the players as well, from that side of things. I was on the whole organisation. I think everyone felt much more positive about just being around the place, and I think that's about fostering a much warmer, nicer, friendlier kind of environment. And I think we had the benefit of that, and you see that really, early Moyes days with the videos that came out of the training ground, the videos that came out of players enjoying themselves really and having fun, little clips here and there. Mark Noble's birthday, flour and eggs everywhere. And things like that. And I don't know whether Potter's up for flour and eggs and everyone dancing around in the training ground, but I think having that kind of more tactile, personal approach is important at a time when you've got quite a lot of churn in the squad of late, and you have to kind of find a way to unite this lot together and to find a collective identity quite quickly. I think that stands him in really good stead for what the club needs at this specific moment.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it was even today, I think I was reading the Athletic article talking about Lopetegui's departure, and there was some quotes from sources inside the dressing room saying that it had become a really difficult place to work. People were very low. Like, I think in part, especially this week, because of all of the press around Lopetegui and what a horrible environment that creates. So bringing in someone who has a track record of creating a really positive, harmonious environment, I think is the perfect sort of antidote to whatever we've allowed to develop, rightly or wrongly. Well, wrongly, really. But
I don't want to speak too much on what we've allowed to develop, because obviously we're not there and we can't see it, and we base all of that on things that we hear and we read, and who knows how much of that is fair or an accurate reflection of what's been happening day in, day out. Sometimes maybe not sometimes, maybe just now, I wonder. I did a thread on Twitter after Lopetegui was sacked about the trip I went on to Asteasu, his hometown, in the summer, and talked to a lot of people, talked to some friends of his actually, in Asteasu, and from spending quite a lot of time around the Basque Country more generally, I think you get a picture of the kind of intensity. I use the word fervor in the thread that I wrote, that people really go at their tasks with. I can think of different stories I've been told about renovations to the outside of churches that have involved Sisyphean people dragging rocks up hills days on end to try and fix things. People, and how you get kudos and credit and acceptance and warmth in the community, both I think on both the French and Spanish side of the border in the Basque Country, is being hard working, being tough, being willing to be out every day. And particularly on the French side, working with your hands. Spanish side, I think the feeling I got from everyone when talking about sort of the Gipuzkoan identity and the Basque identity more generally was about this idea of kind of not really seeking acclaim, not really seeking sort of fame or anything like that, just being willing to stick kind of quite ruthlessly to the task and becoming really good at what you want to do. And I think whatever has been happening at the training ground, we don't know, but I think even just in seeing the way that going to press conferences and watching games and seeing footage back from games, it's quite clear that there was a great degree of intensity and a real feeling that went behind everything that Lopetegui did and does, which speaks positively really about his commitment and his 100%. Dedication and how much he really wants to try and make things work all of the time. Whether that worked for our group of players is a separate question. And I think Potter has a very, very, very different, almost the opposite way of approaching things. And that's not to say he hasn't been spiky with the press in the past. That's not to say he hasn't got real commitment and dedication to his way. But in the bits that I've seen, it definitely comes with maybe a little bit less intensity, a little bit less, speed, and a bit more calmness, which may be quite good for a group of players that are, probably still getting to know each other and still getting used to working with each other, and real range of ages as well. A lot of young players that have come into. That are learning at the Premier League level, and older players that have never played in the Premier League either, like Guido Rodriguez, who are doing an entirely different kind of learning, but learning all the same. Yeah, calmness is one thing, but I think the other major thing that Potter will bring us, and he might deliver this quite calmly as well, is clarity, and clarity is something that has been desperately lacking over the last few months. Whichever way you look at it on the pitch, it's not been entirely clear what West Ham are this season, how exactly West Ham want to play, and what kind of team West Ham want to be. And at times we've seen glimpses of those things, but not necessarily the right technical quality nor physical quality to enable those things to actually come to light and come to fruition in a way that gets results in the Premier League. It might sound harsh, but that is ultimately a fair reflection of what we've experienced as fans of the football club over the last few months. No one watches our team more intensely than us, and I think any West Ham fan over the last few months would be able to say that it's it's been strange. You haven't seen a real clear idea of what your team exactly is this season. And under Graham Potter, although we speak about his flexibility, his ability to adapt to different players and whatever players he has at his disposal, and his commitment also to developing players and improving players, there are some really clear ideas over what kind of team he wants his teams to be, and he brings a real stamp in terms of identity kind of straight away, and he did that wherever he was. He did that. Yeah,
I think it's really exciting. I can't get clarity and blue out of my head now. I think there's some sort of headline in there if anyone wants it. But yeah, it will be exciting, and I think one thing that's got me, I mean, you know me well, Jack. You know that the concept of a possession-based manager coming in that loves data and all that sort of shit is going to get me excited anyway. But I think also from a profile point of view, and sort of where I'm slotting in these players, compounded by the fact that Potter is a manager that has got a track record of getting the absolute best out of the players at his disposal, I think it does seem like a nice fit. And I think one thing to say is that in terms of the way that we're actually going to look to play on the pitch, there are a lot of similarities to how we've been trying to play under Lopetegui. But I think it's the stark contrast and most important point is that Lopetegui was trying to do something with players in roles that couldn't really achieve what he was asking them to do, whereas I think Potter will come out with a similar end goal and a similar style, but by using players in roles that they actually are equipped to deliver on.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that both managers take systems and shapes to one side, because actually both managers do that themselves.
Yeah.
Both managers want to overload the last line effectively in the same way that a lot of managers in the Premier League want to, with numbers, want to achieve numerical superiority in the centre of the pitch where possible to enable opportunities to be effective out wide. Different ideas, I think, about how to generate the final chance.
Mm-hmm.
But some similarity over the fact that both managers are quite happy to generate more chances rather than better chances. I think that's something that both managers are comfortable with. Clearly, Potter is happy with more chances, less so better chances. Moyes, a manager that is completely the opposite. Fewer chances, better chances is exactly how he operates. So I think you're going to see a team that wants to dominate the ball, that wants to win by creating more than the opponent. And you'll see a team that probably still, if you're looking for a major weakness, and we're going to come to these at the end of the podcast, it would be dealing with teams who are particularly effective on the break in transition, who can kind of turn that theoretical strength, which is dominating the game, into a weakness by being really effective with very little of the ball, defending the box really impressively. And you might be thinking, well, if that's the case, then why didn't West Ham beat Brighton all the time under Potter? Why was it that West Ham couldn't beat Brighton all the time under Potter? And I think that's more of a question of that numerical superiority that we speak about in the middle, and being able to adapt to that. And now I think in the Premier League, in the current environment of the Premier League, I think we're seeing the teams that do want to be direct, teams like Nottingham Forest, have adapted to be able to cope with the idea of having four players in the middle, a box midfield, and are now able to more successfully defend against teams that want to dominate the ball and strike in incredible fashion on the break where possible. Enabled, of course, by someone like Chris Wood performing about twice the level he has at any other point in his career to this point. If we break into some of the minutiae and kind of go into what systems are preferable, I think if you look across Potter's career, generally a 3-box-3 is kind of what he wants to create, and whether that starts on paper as a 4-4-2, 4-2-3-1, 4-3-3, 3-4-3, 5-4-1, 3-5-2, whatever it is, generally we're looking at quite similar final in possession shapes, which is the 3-box-3 with the flexibility then to kind of have and this will be familiar to people who've been watching Premier League over the last few years, which everyone on this podcast, everyone listening to this podcast will have done. Someone like a Ben White at Arsenal with that kind of half centre back, half full back profile, playing to narrow up and join the back three. Think Joel Veltman back in the day at Brighton under Potter, and then that player kind of releasing late and overloading with an extra body, kind of as a surprise overload. When you arrive in the final third, it becomes actually really difficult to defend when teams do that successfully. And his Brighton side were really good at being kind of flexible between the very dominant 3-box-3 shape that a lot of teams are using now, and maybe the slightly lesser spotted 2-3-5 kind of shape that you can arrive in those moments where suddenly a centre back comes from nowhere and finds himself in the final third.
I guess, recently.
Yeah, Guardiola, another really good example.
Yeah. I mean, it's exciting, and I think we, especially at the back, I would say, have a lot of the profiles. Well, I say a lot. I think once we use them all, we probably lack depth for those.
3 of the 3 profiles.
Yeah.
Yes.
Beyond that, no. But Max Kilman should be perfect for this. I think we've had a lot of discussion about trying to work out the actual best setup with the current players that we have, and it's actually very difficult because there's a lot of toss-ups here and there. But I think ultimately Max Kilman as a sort of lateral centre-back in the build-up, as you say, who has that licence to carry forward. We've seen him try and do it under Lopetegui, and it's looked good, but we've probably not seen it as much as we would like. And I think Potter is a manager who is going to give him the freedom to do that, which is really exciting. And then I think, as you say, with the box midfield, I think it has the potential to get the best out of a lot of our players. I think Kudus in particular could really thrive as a very good half space operator, probably even more so, sadly, now that Bowen's out. But it does mean that right sort of half space winger role is his for the foreseeable. And equally, it might be the perfect storm for Somerville to really kick on in the Premier League, because he's going to be asked to do a role that is less probably touchline hugging and more potentially drifting in to get involved in the box, rotating with Paquetá on occasion. But I think, you're right to say that, and Potter's said this himself, right? Formations, he's not bound by them. He doesn't really care for formations. What he cares about is a style and arriving at the end goal. And the end goal is, as you say, to overload the back line in whatever way that might be. And ultimately, it's going to look, as you say, like a 3-box-3. What's going to change week in, week out is the rotations. Are we going to rotate the right winger this week? Are we going to allow the left centre-back to get more involved? Are we going to have the centre-backs rotating with each other? And that's it.
That's about adapting to who's fit, who needs to play, and also what the opposition do well and obviously don't do well, which was something he was very, very, very good at doing with Brighton. So, one of the big things that people wanted moving on from Moyes was a manager that would be able to be more adaptable to the opposition's strengths and weaknesses. And I actually think Lopetegui, that was a big part of what we thought we would get with him, and we probably saw the opposite. I think we became far less adaptable to the opposition. It just became about how do we get an 11 on the pitch ourselves that works in any way. I think that will come back in terms of having an 11 that makes sense under Potter. I don't think he'll have too much issue with finding that. And then it will become more about seeing the kind of more positive adaptations rather than desperately kind of looking for a team that makes sense. And therefore there are loads of changes. It's actually about making changes that make sense for the game itself, or looking at the game ahead of it, and making changes to the lineup based on that. One thing I would challenge very slightly based on what you said is I think we've talked about this today. We've been chatting on WhatsApp throughout the day as this kind of the news has been coming in, and Cal sent me a lineup and I sent a lineup back, and we kind of back and forth over which we think is better. I think you see Max Kilman someone that could thrive in a kind of a lateral centre-back role. I see him as someone that Potter, because of the limitations, particularly that we have in the fullback positions, for the kind of style that he wants to implement, I see him possibly as more of a central centre-back kind of figure at West Ham, because I can't really see, and we talked about this at the start under Lopetegui, the idea of Wan-Bissaka narrowing to join a back three or whatever. I can't actually see him having the kind of tactical discipline that is required to do that, and I can't see Vladimir Sofal, who's the other right back option, doing that kind of job either. Whereas I can see the other two, Emerson and Cresswell. Emerson has quite I would say a stronger tactical understanding, more technical qualities, more comfortability with rotations and stuff, which we kind of saw with his relationship with Paquetá. He's kind of more comfortable doing lots of different roles, and Cresswell, who's already played loads of times as a left centre back, I can see those guys doing the more Veltman styled, Dan Burn styled Mark Cucurella styled, Carl Norton styled. Plenty
Go
of
on,
examples.
name a fourth tier Swedish left centre back. Go on,
I haven't got that one. I haven't got that one in the locker. That kind of job, more coming into the centre to help create the numerical overloads in the centre of the pitch, which would naturally then force Kilman in one towards the centre of the pitch, and it would be more Jean-Claire Todibo or Mavropanos that get the freedom that you're talking about, or hoping that Kilman would get. One thing that is nice about that is that Kilman's really both-footed, so having him as the guy that can kind of put his foot on the ball in the centre at the heart of your team and be the real hub for your deep build-up is not a bad thing at all. He's shown that he's very, very good at that and can play off either foot. So his press resistance in that kind of role would be great anyway, even if he doesn't get the kind of freedom to be a dynamic carrier for the team as much as he theoretically would have, and why he was so perfect as a player for Julien Lopetegui, where it would be a defensive midfielder bisecting the centre-backs, and then Kilman gets to become someone that marauds up the pitch.
I just can't get the image of Kilman doing the Dan Burn left-back shift out of my head. That
I know
6'7" dribbly boy.
Can't, yeah.
It's just too perfect. Just once.
Well, you might well
Yeah,
happen.
We never know. Might play him up front. Paul's just crazy like that.
Who knows? Who knows? For me, I probably... in some ways, talking about profiling, I kind of hope not, because I don't want to see Edson Alvarez forced to be a centre-back ever again.
Yeah, 100%.
I always thought that he would be kind of okay at that kind of role. It's just, in the sink or swim test of that this season, it's been a categorical drowning. It's not gone well at all. If we talk in layman's terms about some of the things that would definitely change: out of possession, more aggressive, more compact, two really good things for this team, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the biggest issues that we've seen this season under Lopetegui is how sort of vast the gaps have been between the front line and then the midfield once the front line's been bypassed, and then the gaps between the midfield and the defence, and just the amount of times we've seen any one of the players, but Guido and Alvarez are the two that are going to come to mind most, when they're trying to backpedal and cover all that ground. It's just impossible, because they're not able to do that at this stage of their career. But also, I'm not sure Alvarez was ever really a ground eater in the same way that Declan Rice was. And I think just by narrowing those gaps and bringing everyone in closer proximity, you avoid those issues. But also you make it a lot more difficult for the opposition to play through you as well, because naturally the space is much more congested, and therefore players are required to operate in tighter spaces, which demands a higher quality of player, and that's essentially how Graham Potter's going to play, right?
An example of this, I can't really ever imagine Potter doing the kind of thing that we did away at Leicester this season, where Konstantinos Mavropanos was left alone to defend against Jamie Vardy, kind of on the halfway line, detached from the rest of the team. I think in that sort of situation, under a manager like Graham Potter, you'd see both or all three of the centre-backs pushing more aggressively up the pitch and forcing Vardy to have to drop deeper to help his team defensively, not being quite so concerned about, well, the halfway line is where the offside line is, so that's where our last defender has to be. I think he would be more comfortable pushing more aggressively, which stops something that we've spoken about on so many occasions this season, which was we've kind of termed midfield decompaction, where we've seen so many instances where there are huge gaps between the deepest midfielder and the furthest forward midfielder, and then even wilder gaps really between the defensive line and the player who's operating at the top of the team in attack, or at the most aggressive player in the press, which in settled out of possession play this season has been ludicrous on many occasions, where some players going forward and pressing off and just one really the striker, and the defence going the other way, which is a very bad combination for opening up lots of space, which Erling Haaland has had a lot of fun with on two occasions so far this season. Look, very briefly, and we have to talk about it, I think we both are quite positive about this appointment. We both think that there are lots of things, we've just spoken about all of them, that he's going to be able to do and improve. Lots of similarities, which means that a lot of the work that was done in the summer holds up fairly well in terms of the ideas why those players were brought in. Whether they've worked or not is another question. I'm just saying they were brought in for a manager that wanted to play a 3-box-3, a possession-based style. So moving to another possession-based 3-box-3 means that the kind of flow of logic in terms of who you sign isn't interrupted so much. Questions and concerns. Wing backs. I've already referenced it. I've referenced it many times under Lopetegui, and I've already referenced it in this podcast talking about Potter. I worry still if you look at the Brighton numbers, I think you still see there, similar to Sevilla, the best times at Sevilla, Jesus Navas, really big contributor in terms of the creative load for the side. Marcos Acuna, the same. You look at Brighton's numbers at the times that they were the best, you're looking at really big numbers from guys like Tariq Lamptey, and then you're looking at other situations where, you know, like Solly March would play as a wing back, or Leandro Trossard would play as a wing back. Karu Mitoma also could play as a wing back, and I think that was later, but he would do exactly the same with. They've had wingers who have been comfortable playing those kinds of roles for his sides. I don't think we either have really the fullbacks in our squad that do a huge amount creatively, and the two that we have are the two that are in the sort of B choice roles because they're more towards the end of their Premier League careers, and that being Sofal and Cresswell, guys that have produced big, you know, assist totals in previous seasons. Wan-Bissaka and Emerson probably ahead of those guys at the moment, and different kinds of fullbacks that haven't really produced massive numbers when it comes to either scoring or creating in their careers to this point. And then also just in terms of the athleticism that's required in those roles, the players that we just spoke about at Brighton are just able to kind of dominate the flank alone. They can go up and down for 90 minutes, no worries. Recoveries with Wan-Bissaka and Emerson at various points. Emerson early in his West Ham career, and Wan-Bissaka more so this season, have been really big question marks. And if they're going to be asked to do that kind of thing under Potter, I can see how he could develop some of our players, but some players just don't have the physical tools or technical tools to be able to do the kind of roles that are required. And I do kind of worry about what happens in those positions. We spoke about it before we started recording. We said Bowen's probably the only winger we have that you could convert into that kind of Leandro Trossard wingback or Solly March wingback kind of role. And that seems like a bit of a waste of such a talented player to kind of drop him so far back and get him out of the kind of situations you want him to be in as often as possible.
Yeah, 100% it's a waste. He's our most potent attacking player, and you're moving him further away from the goal by playing him in that role. I know Trossard was ostensibly an attacker. He just played in that wing-back role, but his main task was either to carry into the box or arrive at the back post, which Bowen can do both of, but it's limiting him so much that it just wouldn't be a solution that I would consider viable. I hear all of your concerns. I guess the one saving grace is that I think this is an obvious area for recruitment anyway. Even before Potter, I think it was an area that was going to have to be invested in, especially on that left-hand side with Cresswell's age and even Emerson getting on a little bit. And then Sofal needs replacing at some point as well, and whether that's a backup for Wan-Bissaka or whether it's someone who's slightly more tailor-made for Potter's system, it's somewhere that we will probably see invested in, probably in the summer. Realistically, I don't think January is necessarily the best time, and I don't think it's a desperate concern. The other saving grace being that I think, as we've said throughout the pod, Potter is more than capable of coming in and going, okay, cool, well, I don't have the Solly March profile, so I'm just not going to bother. I'll just come up with another solution that gets the best out of the players. So I think we're assuming there will be a wide player because he loves to stretch the pitch, and that has always been the role of the wingback. But as we say, Pascal Gross played that role once and he did it very, very well. It's just that you slightly tweak what you're actually expecting from the wingback, and it's more of someone that drifts inside and creates rather than bombs up and down, and you get another player to do that. So I see profile wise it's not great, but I think there are potential workarounds. I think the area that I'm more potentially concerned about, and is much more of a pressing issue, and I think Potter's even potentially said it himself behind the scenes with the rumours about us needing to invest in an energetic midfielder. I think that is a profile that we have lacked for a long time, even all the way back to the David Moyes days, and is something that we absolutely will need. If you think about the midfielders that have succeeded under Potter, I'm thinking Yves Bissouma, someone that could just get up and down the pitch for 90 minutes, create, but also beast in terms of intercepting and winning the ball back. McAllister to a slightly lesser extent. Caicedo,
Well,
you know,
definitely late stage. McAllister was outrageously good. Late. Last year at Brighton was just unbelievable at getting up and down like that.
Yeah. And Wepa as well, before he obviously sadly had to retire. He was someone who everyone thought had an unbelievable ceiling, to the same level as all the midfielders that have left, and unfortunately couldn't ever reach it. But profile-wise,
Jakob Modder too played loads of minutes under Potter. So lots of examples of players that can really get around the pitch very, very well.
Yeah. So I think that's my concern, is if we're going to go and spend some money in January, I think you go and find that athletic profile that can do the shuttling the intercepting, the sniffing up. Because if you're going to play as aggressive a press as we anticipate, you're going to need someone that has the energy to do that, but also has the tactical intelligence to know when to step up and when to join the press, which has been a massive, massive issue for us this season, is the sort of disjointed nature of the press. Some players go in, some players sitting, and then all of a sudden there's massive corridors to play through. You need to go and find someone that, can do it, is technically secure, is a freak engine-wise, but also a dual dominator as well, which is a very hard profile to find and a very expensive one.
It is. And, he was very fortunate, and that is one thing that I will say. He was very fortunate to be given some incredible players to play that role at Brighton over the years that he was there. I agree. I think that's one of the big holes in the squad, and actually one of the reasons why I think it'd be quite interesting to see what happens for the rest of this season. But I do think you got to give this manager a summer window,
100%.
kind of regardless of what happens. I know it's like 6-month contracts. It was kind of thrown about for a while, which obviously means there's a lot of pressure on what happens in the next 6 months. But if you don't have kind of one of the linchpin players that you need to get things working, then I think it's important to see what happens when you can put a player like that into the team and see how much improvement can be made. And that's not me saying, oh, hold your horses, don't expect much. It might all be not that great in what remains of this season. I think that's still perfectly fine to get excited about Potter coming in at West Ham. It's just I think it's important to see what a manager can do with and I know we've said he's very adaptable, but one of the profiles, and probably two, I would say, wing back and a energetic midfielder.
At least one wing back. Because
at
I think
least
he can
one
cope
in the
with
squad.
one and have a more sort of central midfieldery profile on the other side. But he needs someone who can do the lung buster.
Yeah, you mentioned Pascal Gross. Ruben Loftus-Cheek did that at Chelsea towards the end as well. He's more than comfortable doing that on one side, but then you'd have like a Ben Chilwell or a Tariq Lamptey or whoever. Someone would be there doing the exact kind of role we described beforehand. On the other side, maybe Ollie Scholes could come through and nail that role, because that's exactly the kind of player he is, getting up and down one flank alone. Definitely the kind of player that he came through as. I know he's played in midfield more recently. I am aware of that, but I think ultimately that's about developing him technically, and I think he'll still find his home out on one of the flanks. What else have we got? I think the last thing, and we have spoken about it, is just that, and this is more of a thing for me because you're slightly different. I've always been a fan of two things. I think adapting to the Premier League right now, so we just talked about pressing really intensely. I think generally there's sort of more success with pressing slightly less intensely in the Premier League right now. So I'd be interested to see how we do press and how aggressively we do press, because I think lots of teams are stepping off the gas slightly at the moment and getting rewarded for doing that. Liverpool, a really good example, slightly less intense than they were under Klopp. That doesn't mean they're not intense, but slightly less intense. And they've actually got probably a lot better and a lot more sustainable, a lot more consistent as a result. So interested in that. And then the big thing for me is, I have always been a big fan of the kind of like generate your big chances. I don't really care how many it is, but make sure they're big. Make sure you get enough big chances in a game to really give yourself a good chance of winning a match. That's my number one biggest concern of the whole lot. I think at Brighton. It became a meme, right? Like the XG underperformers, like it. Yeah. And sure. I mean, he had Neil Maupay was like one of the players that he had to use most at Brighton. Like probably one of the players that's got more appearances under Potter than anyone else in his entire managerial.
Certainly in the Premier League, I looked earlier. I think he was top 4.
Well, there you go. And he is a perennial XG underperformer as a striker. But I still think it's about generating really big chances. And then when you looked at what happened at Brighton, there were lots of games where they generated lots of chances, but maybe not that one very obvious, clear-cut, major opportunity. And that has been a problem for us this season as well. We haven't done that consistently. We've had many games where we've generated lots of decent to good chances, but not really the one clear-cut, hang your hat on that. We are definitely scoring here. That hasn't been the case, and I think that's something that is just a really important part of being a good team in the Premier League, is being able to produce that chance as close to every game as possible, and that's something that I will want to see under any manager, frankly, Potter or not.
No, I hear that. I think that it's valid. I think you do hope that with the higher quality of player. I mean, Fulkrug versus Mopai. Fulkrug way more instinctive and clinical. It's not an exact science, obviously, but you would hope if you put in someone who's more of an XG overperformer, I would say, over his career, then you might see benefits. But as you say, it's more an issue of the fact that he creates a high volume of low XG chances, and that requires frankly, Erling Haaland to capitalise on any of that. But ultimately, I think it's exciting, and also I think it's fair to assume that Potter, since being let go at Chelsea, will have spent a lot of time watching and seeing how the Premier League develops and taking bits and bobs from people that he admires and tweaking his own systems. And he just strikes me as that sort of guy, very studious, very committed to his craft, more so perhaps than a lot of managers. And I think that should only stand us in good stead. So yeah, ultimately, I'm incredibly excited, in case anyone can't tell.
I was going to ask at the end of the podcast, my last point on the pod plan is, are we happy with this pick? And I don't think I need to ask you. I think I know the answer, and I think the listeners do as well. So I think it's also obvious what I think. I'm very happy with this pick. I think we've got a manager that will help move us in the right direction. I think the big lessons that need to be learned about at West Ham is, we've done this 3 times now. Let's not run before we can walk. And I think 3 times we've tried to jump massive stylistic overhaul in one window. And I really hope that Potter is able to see us through the interim period when we're learning as a team and developing as a team. He's got a track record of doing just that. And then it's about giving him the time over a couple of windows to get the benefit of slowly developing the group and adding the pieces that he needs to add to take us to the level that we want to be at. Hopes for the future. Really big for West Ham. We've got a good group of players. We've spoken about that on the podcast recently. We stand by it. I think we both think that our group of players is very talented. It's not without its limitations, but you need a manager that can work with the group and get the best out of the group, rather than imposing ideas on the group that don't necessarily highlight their strengths and minimise their weaknesses. So getting a manager that has a track record of doing that is brilliant for the football club as well. So really, really pleased. Really good step for West Ham this season, something that makes us both feel quite excited about what remains of this season and the future of the football club. Good decision. So this was fun doing an emergency podcast. We don't do this very often, if ever. I think the only time we've done this before was the last time. I think the only time we did this before was after the Conference League win. I think that's literally the only other time we've done an emergency special pod. So might do some more of this from time to time. Might have to drag Cal out on a random evening. No dinner for you. You're on the podcast. But thank you for listening. Thank you all for reaching out on Twitter as well and requesting it. Put a massive smile on my face. I've been feeling really ill all day today. And it was really nice to get loads of messages of people saying, get on the pod. We want the pods. We're refreshing the feeds. We want to hear what you think about Graham Potter. So I hope that was satisfying as a response to your requests. And we'll see you next week on the breakdown, talking about 2 matches. In fact, we might have a breakdown just for I'm not sure entirely how we're going to do it, because we've got an FA Cup match and a Premier League match. We'll figure it out. We'll get a breakdown out, and we'll talk about exactly what Potter has done with his first couple of opportunities to see what the group can do and to impose his ideas or bring his ideas through with the group, and hopefully in one of these games get a somewhat decent performance and maybe a good result. That would be lovely. But until then, come on, you irons, and see you over on Patreon. Definitely go there. Patreon.com/analyticsunited. I forgot to promote it.
Squeeze it in.
I'm sorry, Charlie. I'm sorry. See ya.